Hello, cruel world. My name is Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐡. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. Today, I'm going to do a reaction video to a Ladbible TV vid called Accidental Killer on Living with Guilt. So it's about a man who basically killed somebody when he was very young by accident with one punch. This is the first time I've watched the proper video fully. And I'm just going to give you my thoughts. Let's get straight into it.
I was out with my friends on a night out. It was one of my friend's 18th birthdays. And we were just out all day drinking. Just another weekend out, really. And then as the night wears on and you get a bit more drunk, I got separated from my friends because as the clubs closed on that night, I got some calls from my friends who I got separated with who were in another bar causing trouble, which I didn't know. And they would ring me up and say, "Oh, Jacob, it's kicking off. You need to come and back us up." So me being the, 18, 19-year-old I was back then, I only cared about my friends. And so I went running down to the scene and didn't ask my friend, what's going on? Why are you lot getting into an altercation for? Why are you lot causing drama? Or try and de-escalate the situation and tell them to keep moving on. I sadly took it upon myself to get involved and I threw a punch at the guy that my mate was arguing with, and he fell on the floor.
Okay, so I've given this episode some time to breathe because I really wanted to know what was going on. I suppose while I was listening to that, I was thinking, is this person and his friends antisocial? So somebody with, for example, an antisocial personality disorder would have a lack of empathy, they'd be quite aggressive, they'd be quite impulsive, they wouldn't care about other people, even though they might care about his friends. I suppose my answer is not necessarily, no. I think that this is just, I don't think he's necessarily like a troublemaker or his friends are troublemakers, even though they've kicked off in this one bar. There's no suggestion that it's a gang, for example. So that's not my thoughts at the moment. I think it's probably just loyalty at this point. I don't think what he did is right, but I think, what I'm trying to say is that many normal kind of men would do that. I don't think that indicates anything particular, any kind of personality. I think it's just kids being kids. I mean, he said he was 19 at the time. I think there's just an example of hypermasculinity as opposed to somebody who's like naturally criminogenic. But let's see what he says. Let's carry on.
What were you doing in the days after
that? The days after that, my friends came round the next day, knocked on the door, I answered at the window, and their response was, "Yes, Jacob, your punch man knocked him out one punch," like trying to praise me for what I did. And I guess at the time, I felt a little bit of pride getting that acknowledgement from my friends.
Despite what I said before, I have to say that this does show a complete lack of empathy from him and his friends. They're all sort of showing off, they're giving him props. He hasn't shown even an inch of remorse at this point, at least. It doesn't seem that that him or his friends even thought to check on the victim. Again, to me, this just screams of like peer pressure, hyper-machoism. Yeah, nothing that unusual, even though it's not particularly laudable. It's also not that unusual, psychiatrically speaking.
And then a couple more weeks passed, and I ended up, my mum had saved up some money to actually take us on holiday. And we went to Tenerife.
No way, I went to Tenerife a few weeks ago, but I didn't kill anybody.
It was like on all these water parks, and was on these boats, saw some whales and stuff. And it was like the first time, because from when I went to secondary school at like 13, I'd almost like become ashamed of my mum. Now I was like a young teenager, trying to impress all my mates. And I reconnected with her because I didn't have that kind of, those people ringing me or places to go, stuff to do. And I just remember feeling really guilty for the way that I'd treated her up until that point, because she was the only one I actually believed that I had any ability in terms of like intelligence or my capacity to kind of learn or just achieve anything in life. And so I came back from that holiday, like I got a new kind of perspective.
I think this is quite interesting because it shows, you know, his capacity to feel guilt. He does have some empathy, even though this man Jacob didn't have empathy for the victim at the time. He's able to show some emotions towards his mother and also some introspection. So he seems like he might be quite an insightful young man. So for example, he's not classically what we'd consider a psychopath, right? Because people, psychopaths can't feel guilt, can't feel empathy.
Then a couple of days later, after we come back from that holiday, the police started raiding me and all my friends' house. And this was a month after that punch. And then that's when it started to become a reality that someone had actually passed away because of my actions a month earlier.
Do you remember when and where did you first hear that James, the guy who you hit, died?
When I handed myself in at the police station, the police had called my mum's landline number and they said, "Don't worry, nothing to worry about, just following up on an investigation. Can you come and hand yourself in at the police station?" I'd known some of my friends were being arrested at the time, but wasn't 100% sure what for or anything. And so, yeah, when I went and handed myself in at the police station, that's when they first, told me that they were arresting me. At the time, they were arresting me on suspicion of murder.
So it's interesting that what the police said to him. So that's a very common police tactic. They will say literally anything to get their suspect through the door. Sometimes they kind of cajole them into a false sense of security, just so that they come in and they entice the story out of them. So it doesn't surprise me that the police said one thing to his mum and then, you know, moments later arrested him for murder. I suppose one thing that's going through my head is he's not really shown any remorse or regret yet, but maybe that'll change.
How did it make you feel?
A mixture of every unpleasant emotion combined. Shock, disbelief, self-pity. And I guess at that time I also felt unfortunate. I felt like I was, why has this happened to me? Out of everybody that goes around throwing punches, why did mine have to have the impact that it did?
I'd say I'm yet to form a final judgment on this young man because I've not seen the whole video, but so far he's coming across as, it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Because on the one hand, what he's saying is a little bit selfish. He's not really shown any kind of regret or remorse for ending his victim's life. And he's talked about how unlucky he is. But at the same time, he does seem to be showing some level of emotion. And he seems quite honest as well. And he does have a point. Obviously, the consequence of what he did was horrific, but he was unlucky in that, I don't know, thousands of people will throw punches when they get drunk on a Friday and Saturday night, but that outcome, somebody getting killed, is extremely rare, and also I suppose it is quite unlucky. But again, he's not really yet talked about the victim, but we shall see.
Yeah, everything just kind of flashed through my eyes really, and in the end I just became numb and just blanked it all out. My mum was, the best way to describe it is hysterical. She just kept crying about the pain that the other person's mum would be feeling. And I found that really difficult to even try and think about, because up until then, I didn't really know how to talk about emotions. I didn't know how to talk about feelings. I didn't even know how to ask for help. I just always used kind of running away from my problems as the way of resolving them or pretending that they're not there.
So we can see that Jacob is actually getting quite tearful here, so there's obviously a lot of emotions bubbling in. What's interesting to me is it seems that he has the cognitive empathy, but not the emotional empathy. So empathy is split into those two bits. The cognitive empathy is the ability to understand why you should feel bad or you should feel for somebody else. And the emotional is the actual feeling of itself. So for example, psychopaths have the cognitive ability, so they know when they should feel bad, but they don't actually feel the emotions. Whereas somebody with autism, for example, because they might struggle with understanding human emotions and connections, they might not kind of cognitively understand logically in a situation where somebody should feel bad, but they still feel it themselves, even though they don't understand where it's coming from. I'm not saying that this young man has either of those two diagnoses. I'm just giving you an example of how you can split those in two. So far, he's seems to be expressing the cognitive, so he's talking about the way that his mother's feeling, but he's not yet talked about his own sort of regret, remorse or guilt. I can see his emotions are slightly breaking down, and I sense, I could be wrong, but I sense that it's there, but he's not yet spoken about it. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he's awkward or embarrassed or feels too guilty to say the words directly, but I think it might come out later on in this video.
Were you scared?
Yeah, I was scared, and it just felt awful, to be honest. I was sentenced to, I think it was 13 months in the end, which is 2.5 years. An early guilty plea gets you a third off your sentence. I hadn't had any previous criminal convictions. My probation officer kind of wrote to the judge in the pre-sentence report just saying that she felt the longer that I was probably in prison, the more unhelpful it may have been.
So I suppose that is kind of mind-blowing, isn't it, that the sentence was that short, 2.5 years. And then I imagine with time on remand, plus you often serve sometimes half of your sentence, depending on your behaviour in prison. So half your sentence is served in prison and the rest is in the community. So you're released, but you're on probation. I mean, it's two ways of looking at it, really, isn't it? And I'm not sure where I sit. Probably sit on the fence. On the one hand, he wasn't an antisocial criminogenic person. He's not somebody that's been to prison before. He's not like, a thug or a gangster. But on the other hand, he did take somebody's life, no matter, even if it was completely accidental. So let me know what you think, viewers. I can kind of see the probation officer's point, because it depends. If your perspective is just punishment, then obviously you'd root for a longer sentence. But if it's about rehabilitation and decreasing the risk of future offending, then there's not really logically any reason to keep him in for longer. So yeah, it's a difficult one. Let me know what you think, Schmeich for Schmall guys.
Did you feel a lot of guilt?
At the time I did feel a lot of guilt, but I didn't know what to do with it. Because how could I ever know what the impact was? And I kind of think I was scared of knowing what the truth was, like how that crime had actually impacted on the people involved.
So I do think it's quite interesting that Jacob hasn't mentioned guilt at all. It's almost prompted by the interviewer from Ladbible TV. I don't think, this is my opinion, you might interpret it differently, but I don't think it's not because he doesn't feel guilt. I think it's because, I don't even explain this. I think he's so kind of embarrassed and ashamed that the guilt is almost like a foregone conclusion, and maybe it just feels a bit glib to just sort of come out and say the obvious thing, which is how guilty he feels, and it might feel a bit forced, but just his mannerisms and his emotions that are obviously bubbling behind, to me, show that there is a large amount of guilt here. He just probably finds it difficult to process.
So what do you think helped you process the guilt?
Because it's a common attitude I guess that even from David and Joan, I think, you know, while I was in prison, they were appealing the sentence length to, you know, because they said that, you know, 2.5 years doesn't make up for the loss of a life. But obviously, once they were told that they couldn't keep me in prison for longer, they explored what other options they had, and one of those options was to actually communicate with me and speak to me. Listening to what they were going to tell me was going to be difficult. You know, obviously they weren't going to sugarcoat it. They wanted me to know exactly what the impact was, and to hold me account. And I think that was the start of me being able to process my guilt, which I'm always going to be processing.
So quite a lot seems to be going on here. The first thing that strikes me is you can see that Jacob's presentation has changed a little bit. He's talking much, much slower. He's processing his words. He's saying them really slowly. He's calling the victims' parents by their first names, which kind of suggests that he's had quite a lot of communication with them and might have even felt close to them to a degree. So I think that the reason that he's doing this is a couple of reasons. There's all this emotion that's coming through. You can kind of see he's tearing up a little bit, but he's fighting it all back. Plus, I think he's actually being very respectful with his words because, again, he doesn't want to come off as obvious or glib or superficial. So I think there's a lot boiling underneath there. Plus, what he says makes sense to me. You know, I assess mentally disordered offenders. I help rehabilitate them in locked psychiatric units. And this is exactly familiar to me. Sometimes people don't reflect on the actual consequences of their actions and their crimes until months, even years later. The patients that I see, there's often a reason related to mental illness. So they're psychotic, hearing voices, that have paranoid delusions. So they're not in the right mental state to be able to even understand or accept what they did, let alone feel the guilt behind it. But separate to that, guilt is quite a dark emotion, so it's something that the body kind of denies or rejects. So sometimes it takes time and it takes a bit of a shock to the system before the guilt kind of seeps through. So I think all of those things are happening here.
And that's my, again, some people would say that that's my sentence, really.
Out of the things that James's parents told you, what do you think made the most impact on you?
You know, I was told by the parents that James was the type of person where he'd want me to make something of my life and amount to something positive.
Wow, that's really powerful words there, isn't it? So the victim's parents are suggesting that the perpetrator, Jacob, should, you know, do something with his life, turn his life around. So huge level of magnanimity. I have to say I'd be fascinated to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. I would love to have heard what was said.
That helped me try to believe in myself a little bit more, because I knew I wouldn't be able to achieve anything if I was just stuck in the guilt and shame of what I'd done. And that's when they asked me, you know, what is it that you're going to actually do with your life, Jacob? Because it's okay saying, I didn't even want to say the word sorry. I said, you know, I feel like it would be an insult to say the word sorry. I want to prove to you through my actions that I actually am sorry. And then, you know, that's when I said, okay, well, what are you going to do?
So it seems like this is a kind of a story of redemption, right? So it's actually quite emotional stuff, isn't it? So the parents of the victim are not just taking any BS at face value. They're actually they're holding him accountable. They're making him reflect on his life and choose like some sort of path of redemption, not just saying the words, I'm going to make my life better, but they're sort of saying, you know, prove it to us. and he's accepting this almost as a challenge, as a way to express his remorse rather than words, which can be superficial.
So I said I'll give GCSEs another shot at 21 years old, and smashed it.
Did his mom ever tell you that she forgives you?
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
Very grateful, but I didn't ever want to expect forgiveness. And I understand that forgiveness isn't something that is black and white. Forgiveness means different things to different people.
So I think Jacob is very, very right about this. It's quite insightful. You can, there's that phrase, isn't there? Forgive but not forget. So just because she forgives him doesn't mean that, that's the end of all emotions and that there's still no emotional consequence. She can still be really, really upset with him, but she doesn't want to sort of hold it over. So she's coming from a stance of sort of moral superiority, and ethically she's not holding it over him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she doesn't want something from him. So there could still be underlying, symptoms of hostility and even hatred when you forgive somebody, which I think is what Jacob is kind of alluding to here, which is absolutely 100% completely reasonable considering the circumstances. I also find it interesting, again, a bit like I said earlier, his answers had slowed down. He's really scanning the words in his mind, and he's answering minimally when he talked about that specific question about whether the victim's mother forgave him. And I think that's because there's just so much emotion attached to it that he doesn't want to say the wrong thing. He doesn't want to be disrespectful to her. Yeah.
Do you think if your mom was around, she would have been proud of where he got to?
Yeah, I think she would have been proud. She, it was a shame because she died a week before I got my GCSE results. And I remember getting those A stars and thinking, oh, that was the one person I wanted to show. Say, look, Mum, you were right. But yeah, I wish that I was a better son. I wish I helped around the house more with my mum. I wish I'd tried better in school.
So to be fair to the kid, he's obviously very insightful. He's introspective, quite mature actually, I would say in many ways now in this interview. I think maybe prison has given him a lot of time to reflect on his situation, reflect on not just what he did, obviously, and process that, but also, the other aspects of his life. So, something good has come out of a horrible situation, it seems.
But I was never going to let that be an excuse to give up.
And what is the future like for you?
Involved in campaigns to raise awareness that a single punch can kill, that us men in particular need to talk more about our problems instead of letting them all get bottled up and end up coming out wrong and causing more harm. I was putting together educational resources, workshops in schools, in prisons, doing mentoring work, working with prison staff around training as to how they can get the best out of the men in prison that they're working with, men and women. And so I don't want any of, that's probably been one of my, mantras for trying to help as many people as I have and for sharing my stories.
So if everything Jacob's saying is accurate, and I'm working on the assumption that it is, because there's no reason for him, I think, to lie, I don't think he's saying this stuff to make him look good, then I have to say, good on him. He's really going out of his way to try and use the life lessons that he's learnt from his own mistake and his own experience to improve the lives of others and to decrease the chances of this happening again. So I think he's trying to make the best opportunity from this horrible, horrible situation. So, what he did was horrific, even if it was unintentional, but good on him for trying to find a silver lining in this horrible situation.
And so, yeah, I just didn't ever want to expect forgiveness, and I still don't forget forgiveness. And even if someone said they forgive me today, it's okay if they don't forgive me tomorrow. the biggest thing for me is my own journey of forgiving myself.
Okay, so that's the end of the video. So to conclude, I think this person, Jacob, is being very, very honest and open. He comes across as somebody who, you know, has all these emotions bubbling underneath the surface, and he's trying his best to process them and to not do it in a kind of superficial or glib way. I have to say, I think he was very, very unlucky. Obviously not as unlucky as the victim, and he ended somebody's life, but and I can't understate the impact of what he did, but I don't think his intentions were anywhere near as bad as that, because, you know, lots of young men, even women, get into fights and do stupid things, especially when they're drunk. Lots of people throw punches, it happens all the time, but just the consequences were unbelievable in this one case. I work with mentally disordered offenders, I give expert evidence in criminal cases, and I have to say the level of violence that I see, that I'm used to for the average case, is far, far higher. You know, everything from attempted murder, stabbing. The perpetrators themselves are often victims of like physical or different types of abuse. They've been through horrific levels of violence. You know, throwing one punch, obviously it's not a good thing to do, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's actually very low on the scale of violence within offenders. It's just extremely unlucky. Other thing that sort of strikes me is the magnanimity, am I saying that word right? Let me know in the comment section, of the parents, of the victim, of James's parents. Not only have they forgiven Jacob, but they're also sort of encouraging, pressurizing him to move on with his life and to make something out of it. And to his credit, it seems that he's done that. Again, if everything that he said that he's doing, the workshops, everything is accurate, then he's trying to help spread awareness about a situation to reduce the chances of it happening again. Most people, probably myself included, would just want to disassociate themselves from that incident and that part of their life, prison, the shame, the guilt and everything. Most people would bury it, you know, just deny these painful memories, but he's not done that. He's used all the pain from the past to try and make something better. So hats off to the young man for doing that. Okay, I've rambled on enough. Those are my thoughts about this video. If you like this kind of thing, I've done some other reaction videos to like this viral catatonic schizophrenia video. I've done some reaction to Amber Heard and some of her recent behaviour, as well as her expert witnesses. Go chickadee check all that stuff out. Subscribe, or I will come around your house and I'll do a massive dump in your toilet. Do not forget to buy my book. Peace out. Do not forget. Stay thymic. I love you.